Caitlin Clark wants an NWSL team, Jason Kelce's getting a late night show, and we hear about the challenges of an elite women's soccer program in the football-oriented NIL era. Later, we're unpacking the awkward and hilarious details of the Jets firing Joe Douglas, and we hear about the evolution of media through the lens of the biggest moments in sports. It's Monday, November 25th. I'm your host, John Shames, and this is Front Office Sports Today. In today's episode, we're chatting with my colleague Alex Schiffer about how the football teamless Santa Clara University and its elite women's soccer program is navigating the NIL era and its new challenges to continue producing future national team stars. Plus, there have been some notable coaching and agent changes, and Aaron Rodgers back to the Jets would apparently be a shock. Later, we hear from longtime Fox Sports broadcaster Chris Myers for his inside look and untold stories of history's greatest athletes. First, let's hit some headlines. The Orlando Pride won the NWSL championship on Saturday, delivering the city its first professional sports title. It marks the end of a pivotal season for the NWSL as they now look to expand to new markets. Friday, Commissioner Jessica Berman announced that the 16th team will be awarded to either Denver, Cleveland, or Cincinnati, with Caitlin Clark an important part of that Cincy ownership group. Berman called Clark's contributions to women's sports, quote, incredible and historic, and that her interest in the NWSL is an honor. Saturday's college football results are likely to cause some shakeups in their fourth college football playoff rankings when they're released on Tuesday night, after numerous ranked upsets headlined by Alabama getting crushed by Oklahoma. The Crimson Tide now have their first three-loss season since 2010, and their hopes for the CFP take a huge blow. Other notable upsets on Saturday included a quadruple overtime win for Auburn over number 15 Texas A&M, and Ole Miss losing to Florida, whose commitment to head coach Billy Napier looks slightly more stomachable now. But such is not the case for Tulsa head coach Kevin Wilson, who was fired on Sunday after a 63-30 loss to USF marked his ninth loss by 30 or more points in the past two seasons. Tulsa AD Justin Moore said that, quote, with the rapidly evolving landscape of college athletics, we know the importance of positioning our football program and athletic department to thrive and excel in the upcoming years. Wilson was one of a few coaches across different sports who got the axe this weekend. Other notable firings included Steve Cooper of Leicester City, who was fired after 15 matches, and the St. Louis Blues firing Drew Bannister less than a year after hiring him. Over in the NFL, Joe Schoen of the New York Giants doesn't have to worry about his job security, for now at least, even despite the Giants' move to cut Daniel Jones on Friday, less than 2 years after signing him to a 4-year, $160 million contract, mind you. CBS Sports reported on Sunday that owner John Mara intends to bring Schoen and head coach Brian Daboll back next season, and that he understands why Jones was given the contract extension in 2022. Meanwhile, the Giants will take the full $22.21 million cap hit for Jones as he looks to find a new home, which will likely be with a playoff contender like the Vikings or Ravens, according to ESPN. Speaking of ESPN, they're giving Jason Kelce a late-night show. They call it Late Night with Jason Kelce will tape beginning in the new year in front of a live studio audience in Philadelphia. Kelce said that the show will be inspired by his love for Conan O'Brien and will feature, quote, legends of the game, friends that I played with, coaches, and celebrities. In the Faces First model that ESPN is moving towards, it sure looks like Kelce's in prime position to be the next Disney star. Santa Clara University women's soccer program has produced U.S. women's team stars like Brandi Chastain, Leslie Osborne, and Allie Wagner, and more. But with no football team at the school, new changes to college sports like the introduction of NIL and the impending House vs. NCAA settlement could present challenges for this legendary program. Owen and Front Office Sports reporter Alex Schiffer discuss what it will take for this program to continue thriving. That conversation is next.
Joined now by Front Office Sports breaking news and enterprise reporter Alex Schiffer. Welcome, Alex.
Thanks for having me, Owen.
Always great to have you on. So you wrote a feature for us about Santa Clara and how they are not a football school. They're predominantly a soccer school, but they are still swept up in all the changes, that are largely football driven within the NCAA. What's the basic thrust here? Why are they even involved?
Yeah, why? I got this idea actually from covering the Nets years ago with Steve Nash. He went to Santa Clara. He's the most famous alum. And I'd learned, around the time he stepped on campus that they'd also gotten rid of football, which made, his success with the program, an even bigger deal on campus. And, they're known for women's soccer. Julie Ertz played there, Brandi Chastain. And I just thought that they were a really interesting test case in the current college landscape as a school that has some really good sports that traditionally don't make money, like women's soccer, in a conference without football that obviously is the biggest revenue driver and is usually brings in the money to offset some of those sports that run in the red. So they're dealing right now with the pending house settlement like everybody else. And how do you kind of make revenue sharing work if they opt in with your athletes when you're not bringing in the biggest revenue driver of them all in football? And they also have the ability to maybe add some scholarships to their non-Olympic sports. How do they do all this while working with a much smaller pile of cash than most schools?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of reminds you of life before these giant media deals in college sports when, sports was just one thing that was happening on campus and not this like major business essentially that is being operated by these schools under unique rules and circumstances. Um, so so yeah, how are they getting by? Or like, are they getting by? Is this a major disadvantage when you compare them to other soccer programs, other women's soccer programs? Are they, playing with one hand behind their back? Not a good soccer metaphor, but when they have to compete with these other schools that do have football programs.
Yeah, Santa Clara soccer coach Jerry Smith would disagree with you on your metaphor because he used the exact phrase of one hand tied behind our back. I think they're being crafty. It's Jerry talked about how he can't, he's changed the way he recruits and he doesn't chase recruits that are going to wind up going to a school with football because, those schools have the NIL funds to, offer money to players all the way down their roster and decent money where they have to pick their spots and mainly offer money to transfers. He's only offered a transfer so far. He knows the day is coming where he has to offer to a high school kid, but he's changed the way he recruits. He's tried to not target the biggest fish and try to get more players you can develop. He mentioned, Julie Ertz wasn't his biggest recruiting battle, but might have been his biggest success story. And he also said how, he's found that there's different things that appeal to different people. He's got a lot of grad transfers on the roster. They like the idea of working near Silicon Valley. You're a Bay Area guy. Santa Clara is not too far from Silicon Valley. He said that things like that, the academics of having a master's degree from Santa Clara, those are things that he sold a lot more than in years prior as ways to get good players in the door. And, he said, he goes, the portal took their best player. Farrah Walters is, starting on Duke. They're the number one women's soccer program in the nation right now. But they have 7 new transfers in this year. So he's kind of fought the portal with the portal. NIL is still something they're trying to figure a lot out of.
Yeah, I mean, selling players on development and the school's academic programs. This is like the good old days. So how is the House NCAA settlement, that is going to allow schools to share the revenue or, pay players directly? How is that potentially going to impact things at Santa Clara?
Yeah, this is going to impact every school, but like the, roughly $20 million that schools are going to get for back pay to athletes who missed out on this in recent years, that's going to come a lot from the NCAA and from some of these TV deals. So the money that schools get from the NCAA, they're just not going to get for a while or less of it. And so they're going to have to kind of work with a more limited pot on some of these things and find money elsewhere with it. They're also trying to get the men's basketball program going. They've had some recent success stories, like with the Warriors, Brandon Pajemski played there last year, and Jalen Williams of the Thunder. They're really hoping to maybe get in the tournament this year, and they know that the money from that will really go a long way toward helping the department and getting the basketball programs good. The NCAA tournament revenue money will do a lot for a small department like theirs. So they're trying to get basketball good and kind of hope there's a domino effect to other programs, just like a lot of schools are doing the same bet with football, except if you're not good at football, it's a much steeper climb. And also with basketball, as we all know, one player can significantly change the game.
Right. And yeah, that I'm wondering if kind of along those lines, is like the stakes are ultimately lower here. Because, if you're pouring, $20 million plus a year, probably more of that with a coach and all the facilities and all that, 20-30 million a year into your football program and things go poorly, that's really bad news. If just like the total dollar amount is lower, is it like ultimately just a lower stakes game?
Yeah, I think that the common thread throughout my reporting of this story was, football can giveth and football can taketh. Title IX obviously protects a lot of scholarships, but when you have that involved with football, the amount of scholarships you need on the women's side to make up for the 85 on the football side is obviously steep. You're playing with a lot less numbers if you're Santa Clara when it comes to that. So those Olympic sports won't be as affected as it would if they had football. again, at the same time, a lot of this is about money, and you're just working with a smaller amount of it to kind of feed a lot of hands. So I think that football, the conference commissioner I talked to for the story, Stu Jackson, he talked about how by not being a football conference, we're able to talk about improving basketball every single day, which football and basketball conferences can't do. And so they're trying to find ways to make the most out of every dollar, get their hands on every dollar, and get the programs they can good, and hope that there's a cash flow that starts that's able to benefit other areas.
Yeah, should be interesting. Check out the story, listeners, at frontofficesports.com. Alex Schiffer, thanks for joining us on the show.
Thanks for having me, Owen.
The story behind the Jets cleaning house continued to amaze. After Robert Saleh was immediately fired following his demotion of Nathaniel Hackett, Jay Glazer now details a similar level of irony with the moment that Woody Johnson fired GM Joe Douglas. According to Glazer, the Jets owner arrived in his helicopter on Tuesday morning during practice, catching everyone's attention. GM Joe Douglas turned to head coach Jeff Ulbrich and joked, "If they pull me off the practice field, it's been an honor to serve with you." The two initially laughed about it, says Glazer, but then Douglas was indeed pulled off the practice field and fired shortly afterward. The New York Jets, my New York Jets, continue to demonstrate a laughable level of dysfunction. Even when they aren't playing, they still make headlines for the most absurd story of the day, in my opinion. Woody Johnson is now going scorched earth on the gangrene, and Aaron Rodgers looks like he's next. Johnson wanted to bench the struggling quarterback back on September 30th, but was resisted, which could have something to do with both Saleh and Douglas getting fired eventually. Now, Ian Rappaport says that it would be, quote, a shock if Rodgers was back next season. All signs are pointing to this ending as poorly as they're going. Over in the NBA, Zion Williamson is parting ways with his agency, CAA, for reasons unknown, but it is coming at a crucial time. Zion is out, again, this time with a hamstring injury, and has no concrete table to return, according to ESPN. While the injury bug is nothing new for Zion, what's different this time around is his contract situation. The final 3 years of his contract extension, worth $197 million in total, are not guaranteed. That means the Pelicans could theoretically waive Zion after the season with no financial ramifications. Now, what's the likelihood of that happening? Pretty low in my estimation. Zion's one of the NBA's most dominant players when he's healthy, and he certainly has the star power and fan excitement factor to match. For a Pelicans team that really doesn't have that guy elsewhere and has the 11th highest payroll in the NBA, they almost certainly wouldn't decide to let Zion go for nothing. Still, Zion's decision to switch agents with 3 years left on his deal does suggest that some contractual change could be looming. Fox Sports broadcaster Chris Myers has been with the company since 1998, witnessing and reporting on the most important moments in sports. He and Owen discuss some of the hidden stories surrounding major sports events, including Chris almost getting beat up by Mike Tyson, and the evolution of sports reporting. That conversation is coming up next.
I'm joined now by Chris Myers, Fox Sports play-by-play announcer, reporter, and studio host. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. It's nice to see you.
Yeah, great to have you on. So your book, That Deserves a Wow, came out earlier this month. It's a look back at some of the biggest moments and personalities in sports over the last 30 years, where you have a personal story to tell. In putting this together, was it pretty clear which moments you wanted to hone in on?
That was the hard part, was shaping, because we're talking about, a decade at ESPN and then 20 plus years at Fox, and World Series, Super Bowls, and the moments that I think what I ended up shaping in the whatever 18, 19 chapters was the things that people asked me most about. Hey, you interviewed O.J. Simpson live, the first one after this, or the last one to interview the great John Wooden, or you were there when Brady, the comeback, you were the first guy to interview him on the network broadcast. So some of those stories, and a little bit about just my background. I wanted people to get a feel of sportscasting from the inside out, the things that happen in our lives that shape maybe how we cover or react to a story or to people in interviews, whether it's winning or losing. So that was a challenge, kind of fitting it all in there. But I wanted it to be a fun read. I mean, a sports fan will love it, and even if you're not a sports fan, I think you'll appreciate a lot of things in the book.
Yeah, and it's interesting using what people ask you about as the barometer, just because so often in the moment you're just, you're trying to do the job and, you're focused. You're just like thinking, what's my next question? Maybe
Right.
In some cases, like, how do I physically get to this player? Or, in a case like O.J. Simpson, there's some delicate topics there. So you kind of used the sort of the after the fact, like what the reaction you get, because often you don't know what you're going to get.
Yeah, and some of people might have heard the story, but then they didn't hear other things. And I went back on some of these and had to have a researcher help me dig things up in terms of the exact quotes, or in some places we had video to support things since I've been through that, so that I could. Okay, so when Mike Tyson got angry and lunged at me, wanting to beat me up, what was I thinking? People didn't at the time, that we didn't air that part of it, but I could talk about that and how it settled down and what happened afterwards, and so that's why I wanted to take those stories and then tell them more about it, so that they felt a little closer. Whether it was a happy moment, the Red Sox ending the curse after 86 years, that World Series, to be in that dugout, to have watched that comeback against the Yankees, and then the self-proclaimed idiots, cowboy up, whatever you want to call it. Those kinds of moments are happy moments, but then there were, the unexpected moments. You're at a World Series and an earthquake happens, or you're at the Summer Olympics and a bomb goes off, and then you have to. You're not just there as a witness. You have to start telling people about it and reporting. In some cases, the only one doing it at the time, and that's that's what I wanted people to feel, that to be a little bit closer to it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I mean, yeah, there's so many stories. I guess I'll have to read the book, but just on Tyson, how did you escape the Iron Mike?
Well, thankfully, and it was when he just got out of prison, so it was coming back to fight, and it was at his Las Vegas estate by the pool, and we were sitting across from each other. And I'll shorten the story because more is in the book, but essentially, I upset him with a particular question that I thought was very reasonable, and he had been calm and thoughtful in the interview prior to that. But he lunged towards me, saying that I was trying to provoke him, and he calling me names and cursing, and started to swing. And I mean, it really like spitting a rabbit, not spitting intentionally, but his anger spit was coming out of his mouth. And I mean, I'm white. I turned even whiter. And, his bodyguard, and then there was also like a guy he had trained with that were standing on each side, and they, thank God, quickly reacted and kind of hooked his arm and got him. And he was a little bit out of shape, Tyson, from not having fought recently. So they got him from before he got to me. And I don't know if he was actually going to hit me. This was more than just a scare, because his I've seen him snap in and out of rage in a ring. Obviously, Holyfield's ear biting. So that they got a hold of him, and our producer stepped over, and I just said, "Hey, Mike, if you don't," once I saw my life flash before, I said, "If you don't want to answer the question, just tell me and we'll leave." And then he was like, No, stay. I'll finish your questions." And then we wrapped up the interview, and I was in a hurry to get out of there. And he was like, No, let me give you a tour around the house. And so it was a fascinating story, but it showed you something about the kind of personality that Mike Tyson has, and maybe still has after his recent fight, still wanting to be in the ring, where he told me, by the way, one of the two most comfortable places that he has found in life is in the ring, and the other one, well, it's in the book, as he'll explain that.
Yeah, in addition to Tyson, you spent time with Muhammad Ali, Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, Barkley, Barry Bonds, Serena Williams, many people. Is there an athlete, when you think of who is maybe the most misunderstood by the public, is there anyone who comes to mind?
Yeah, right away. Well, I mean, Tyson may be one, but some of it is raw, and you see it. But really, Barry Bonds, who was a very difficult person to kind of sit down and interview. I think I got the impression, and he talked about it, just liked playing baseball, but didn't necessarily like all that came with it, the crowd, the fanfare, but that's part of the job, so he wasn't complaining, but I don't know whether he was shy or what it was. And this is, he was a great player before the alleged, steroid use or whatever you want to call it, PEDs. But I the more I got to interview him through time, I found that, he was a little misunderstood. Maybe sometimes that's the person, right? The athlete you're talking to. But he did, express himself in a way that I thought was telling, and that he felt he enjoyed himself the most, not playing baseball, not that he didn't like that, or being, talking to fans, but riding his motorcycle up and down the Pacific Coast Highway. That was kind of his happy moment. That's kind of where he liked to be in life. And so that, at least he offered that up. And I thought, okay, so, guys can be moody, you catch him in the wrong situation, but having been around him enough, whatever you think of what he did or the great home run hitter he was, certainly I think maybe a guy who was misunderstood.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of speaks to, I've been thinking about this, it's a topic that comes up all the time in sports, where basically, like, the athlete and the media, they work together on some level, but most of the time you want slightly different things. The media wants a story, and, and sometimes that's just, you don't have to go looking for it. It's right there in front of you. Sometimes you dig something up and the athlete feels like you're blowing something out of proportion, or you heard something you weren't supposed to hear, or you violated their trust. And the reporter's saying, well, my job is to get the story, and this is a story. So, it's obviously you want their respect, and you want to, keep things friendly as much as you can, but sometimes you have to make that choice, and it's not an easy one.
Yeah, well, and I was referred to by producer Dave Coelho at Fox, calling me the Velvet Hammer years ago, because I could ask or would ask difficult questions, but in a sensitive, soft way, so they weren't beating people over the head. But I do think there are boundaries about that, and it's a discredit to people who do cover sports, broadcasters or journalists, whatever, who misrepresent athletes. Sometimes it happens by accident. Other times you can't force a story or force an agenda. And so, all the people I've interviewed, I've always tried to be straightforward with that. And if, we don't give them questions ahead of time, but if I asked them a tough question, and whether it was a player about domestic abuse that he was involved with on the air, or a DUI or something like that, and they would give an answer, and then I would want to know more, but they would say, you know what, I'm really uncomfortable talking about that. So that's okay. I mean, I tried, I did my job. They were clear with what they wanted to say or not say about it. And then I think you have to move on. The difference now, though, is, and more, and this is, I think we're all better off for it, whether it's fans who have comments or put shows up, but players can speak directly through social media or YouTube channel, whatever their device is, and whether it's Instagram or whatever, and they can represent themselves. And sometimes that gets them into trouble. Sometimes it's good to have somebody else as a go-between on those kinds of things. But at least you're getting their point of view or what they want to say.
Do you feel like that's changed your job, or changed how you do your job? The fact that we're getting so much more directly from players, and they aren't just these kind of mystery figures, except for those 30 seconds that you get them in front of a camera, but mostly you just watch them play and you try to figure out who they are from that. Do you feel like that's changed how you operate at all?
Yeah, I think. Well, I do think it's altered the business. Now they don't need us as much to describe them, cover them, expose them, give them hype or promotion. They can do a lot of that themselves, and that's okay. I think you can always find a different tact, and I think the art of a good interviewer is bringing something out in somebody that maybe you haven't seen before. Not gotcha questions or trying to ambush anybody, but it's the old thing about gets people comfortable. And my policy was kind of, and I learned this at a young age, saw this something like this in a movie, but I applied my own. Treat the famous person as a regular guy, and the regular guy like a famous person, and that evens things out. So people to people, and I think that's when people are comfortable. I think they're more willing to kind of reveal who they really are or what they're really thinking.
So many of the endearing moments that you see with athletes is when you kind of realize, like, they're people too,
Yeah.
like they love their dog, like they have the same favorite video game as you, or whatever it is, like they listen to the same music. So yeah, I mean, of course they're like up on this pedestal. They make so much money, they're celebrities, and some of them love that, some of them like Bonds, and a whole lot of others, that's not why they're in that position, and it can be uncomfortable for them, and it's just part of the job.
Yeah. And they're vulnerable people too. I mean, they have good days and bad days. They say things they wish they hadn't said, and that's why I always thought too, covering a Super Bowl or a World Series or some of those events where after the game ends, getting to them as quickly as you could, because that's the raw emotion. Patrick Mahomes, his first Super Bowl, and Fox had that game, and getting to him, and actually ran into Andy Reid first on the field in the scramble, so we put him on, and his wife steps in, and those are the happy, the euphoric moments, and so those are easy. Even if you ask a question, they're just spilling their excitement, and that's okay. But sometimes you got to get to a coach like Bill Belichick. I had to interview him for the network on Fox after he had that perfect season, the Patriots, and they lose to the Giants. Again, I was on that sideline working the game. You think they're going to win? Eli Manning and the Giants beat him, and it was he didn't. I could just tell he didn't want to do it. It was a difficult thing. So that one wasn't as immediate, but eventually he did do it, which I appreciated. But they were short answers, and people thought he was rude. I just saw it as a guy who didn't want to lose and who was maybe stunned by it all. But those are the moments that you try to bring to fans, and you try to bring them to them or viewers as well as you can, whether the coach or the athlete is winning or losing, or has enjoyed a high point in their life, or has gone through something difficult.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those moments where it's like that might be the worst moment of his career for all I know. It's got to be up there.
Yeah.
And the next thing he has to do is there's a camera in his face, like, how do you feel? How'd you lose that game?
Right.
What happened there, Bill? And it's like, he's not what he wants to be doing. He doesn't want to be speaking to the nation at that exact moment.
Yeah, he probably wants to, yell at somebody. But that's the one thing I try to always avoid is how do you feel? There's different ways to word things. Describe your emotion at this time. How difficult was it to talk to your team after such perfection? Or can you share with us what you told them in the locker room a moment ago? Or there's so many different ways. And again, people are going to go in the answer that some of them have. Just like when they win, this is a great way. Everybody counted us out. Whatever. But at least you're getting their immediate response, or as quickly as you can to the big moment in sports. It really is. Sports is about people underneath, and that's one of the things that in the book I really wanted to bring that out. As much as we love the games and we keep score and the competition, et cetera, et cetera. And growing up in a family and being in situations, observing how other people reacted, and it kind of helped. When I got into the part of the business where there were some tough interviews or people that were difficult, but you still had a job to do, and they're people at the end of the day.
Well, Chris Myers, appreciate you coming on, and congratulations on the book. Thanks for joining us on the show.
Thank you, and check out the foreword by Bill Murray. There's some funny Bill Murray stories in there as well. He's an astute sports fan, but thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Time for Front Office Sports Tomorrow, where we look ahead to the biggest stories coming up in the business of sports. The NFL is debuting its Thursday night flex scheduling for the first time ever in Week 16. On Friday, the league announced that they're flexing out the game between the Browns and the Bengals for a Broncos-Charger matchup that could have huge postseason implications. The Browns-Bengals game will now be at 1 p.m. the following Sunday. The league has a history of flexing games in and out of the Sunday night spot, but this is the first time an NFL game has been moved to an entirely different day. It's an interesting experiment for the league, and we'll see if they resort to moving around Thursday night games in the future. That's all for today. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, please be sure to share it with a friend and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you may listen. I'm John James. This is Front Office Sports Today. We'll talk to you tomorrow.